pre-made shells. I love homemade pie dough. I think it's actually a pretty easy thing to do and an easy thing to do well. And I also think it's an easy place to start for gluten-free. This is our dry pie mix, and the ingredients are sorghum, potato starch, potato flour, cornstarch, and sweet rice flour. Little sugar, little salt, little xanthan gum, and that's it. So I'm cutting the butter up into small pieces. And you'll notice I don't have a pastry knife or a pastry cutter or any of those up here. I prefer to do this by hand, especially in small batches. Oddly enough, we prefer to do this by hand in very large batches, much to our dismay on some evenings. But the reason I don't like a pastry cutter is you don't have control over the butter size. And the butter size makes all the difference in your pie crust. The more you work that butter and flour together, the more tender your dough is going to be. So if you reduce your butter to pea-sized pieces and make your flour look kind of yellow, it's going to be very soft, very tender. Bakes up dry, but in the mouth it just melts, okay? The larger you leave those butter pieces, you're going to get a more flaky dough because you get thin sheets of butter in between layers of dough, and those melt in the oven, create steam, and give you those individual layers that you find inside pie. A lot of people with pie dough, they suffer from what I call mindless mixing. They get their hands in a bowl and they just can't help themselves, right? And they just work it and work it and work it and work it to death, and you always end up with the same kind of pie dough. You know, food processor, you almost have no choice in what happens. That goes so fast. So I am a big believer in pie dough by hand is a good way to go. And you know, one pie crust, not that hard. All right, so the motion I am doing, guys, is this snapping motion, okay? It's almost like you're snapping your fingers and you're sheeting butter into the dry mix. You'll notice I'm not doing this, okay? I'm not mushing it all together. I don't want the heat of my hands to start to melt this butter. Keeping it nice and cold, working quickly, picking up one piece at a time. That's all I'm doing, working snapping like this, okay? And creating these lovely flat sheets. They're almost the size of my thumbnail in thickness and in diameter and size, okay? And those are the size pieces I like in my pie dough. So I'm done sheeting my flour, right? Now again, it's a choice. If you wanted a more tender dough, make those butter pieces smaller. It's really about choice. Kathy always teases me that I'm the only pastry chef in the world that doesn't believe in recipes or specifics.
Measuring, timing, none of those things matter.
I'm a big believer in being a conscious cook, right? What do you want the outcome to be, and how do you get there versus me telling you there's only one right way. That's just not, and this is another place most people get off track. They make their pie dough too wet. The wetter it is, the more it's going to shrink, the harder it's going to be to roll out. You really do want a pretty dry dough. So you're not going to add all your liquid at once. And I'm just tossing. I'm not even squeezing or mushing, right? Just tossing lightly. You want to make that decision? All right. And another thing you will find is the more you work that butter in, the less water it's going to take, because your butter and flour are kind of holding themselves together, where the larger you leave the butter pieces, it's going to take a little more liquid. So again, we give an approximate quantity, and you need to use your judgment a little. What's the worst that happens? You throw it out, or you sprinkle it on top of your fruit and make a crumble, right? It's not the end of the world, no matter how you look at it. All right. So I would say this is wet enough, and to prove it, what you're going to want to do is wrap that into a disc, okay? Stick it in your fridge and refrigerate it for at least a half an hour. Again, cold is